Hello, everybody. Thanks again for visiting my YouTube channel. This is the place where we discuss the Lord's Recovery Movement of Witness Lee, also known as the local church movement. Well, today I have another list of controlling, high control, abusive group behavior to consider in light of the Lord's recovery. This list is put out by Cult Research, cultresearch.org, which is headed up by a woman named Janja Lalich, who is Professor Emeritus of Sociology at Cal State Chico in California. And she also wrote the book Escaping Utopia, which was about leaving these types of groups. And this book has been recommended to former Lord's Recovery members as a guide to going through the process of leaving this group. We also went over the list of characteristics, top 10 warning signs of a potentially dangerous group or leader put out by the Cult Education Institute. And this list is different. It's similar in some ways, but it's different in its approach. And what's interesting is I think you'll see that the Lord's Recovery again matches up with this list of characteristics. Now, what this list describes is a group that these sociologists call a cult. Now, one thing that's important to see or understand is that the way Christians define cults and the way sociologists define cults are two different things. Christians tend to define a cult as a heretical group. We tend to think of the Mormons as a cult and the Jehovah's Witnesses as a cult and other doctrinally heretical or aberrant groups as cults. And the Lord's Recovery has argued, well, it's not a cult in that sense. And it even got the Cult Research Institute to sign off on the fact that it's not unorthodox really in its doctrines. And so they say, therefore, we're not a cult. But what the Cult Research Institute did not do is study the sociological behavior within the Lord's Recovery. And the sociological behavior of the Lord's Recovery can be shown. And as I said, we looked at the characteristics from the Cult Education Institute, and they matched up on those characteristics. So this list of characteristics we're going to go over, and again, you'll see how the Lord's Recovery matches up on them. So let's get started. The first characteristic in this list is the group displays excessively zealous and unquestioning commitment to its leader, and whether he is alive or dead, regards his belief system, ideology, and practice as the truth as law. Well, that is the Lord's Recovery's view of Witness Lee. He is the source of truth. You do not argue with his teaching. His ministry is the one ministry from the throne, and the leader is revered and held up as a special person. Definitely matches here. Number two, questioning, doubt, and dissent are discouraged or even punished. Again, the Lord's Recovery matches this. They do not tolerate dissent. They do not tolerate disagreement. They do not tolerate people speaking differently, as they abuse that verse in the Bible that says don't speak differently or don't think differently. They have high control by abusing those kind of verses. And they will quarantine you, aka shun you, or even excommunicate you for having a different opinion than they teach. Number three, mind-altering practices such as meditation, chanting, speaking in tongues, denunciation sessions, and debilitating work routines are used in excess and serve to suppress doubts about the group and its leaders. What this means basically is the group puts stress on the members in order to control their thinking. And this can be done through rituals or through a overly busy routine. And one thing the Lord's Recovery does is they keep their members on a busy schedule of a lot of meetings. They expect them to skip vacations and holidays to go to trainings or the 7 feasts. And they also practice calling on the Lord in prayer reading, which are not fundamentally bad practices, but they tend to practice them in a group setting in a kind of chanting or repetitive way that can induce an altered state of mind. Number four, the leadership dictates, sometimes in great detail, how members should think, act, and feel. For example, members must get permission to date, change jobs, marry, or leaders prescribe what types of clothes to wear, where to live, whether or not to have children, how to discipline children, and so forth. Once again, the Lord's Recovery is high control in this area. You are expected to get the fellowship from the brothers, which basically means get permission. They've arranged marriages. They don't like people to move or go to a different city without talking to them about it. They want to forewarn the leaders in the city they're going to. They will not allow you to move to a city where there's not a local church, and so forth. There's high control there. Number 5, the group is elitist, claiming a special exalted status for itself, its leaders, and members. For example, the leader is considered the Messiah, a special being, an avatar. The group or leader is on a special mission to save humanity. This is the Lord's recovery all the way. Witness Lee is the minister of the age. The group is God's unique move. They are doing the one work of God. If you're not doing this work with them, then you are doing something that is probably just vain religion. Number 6, the group has a polarized us versus them mentality, which may cause conflict with the wider society. The Lord's recovery doesn't give a hoot what wider society is doing. They are the only ones that are doing life right. Everybody else is some kind of threat or enemy. If you are not in the Lord's recovery, you are either in Babylon, aka religion, or you're in the world, aka secular sin. Number 7, the group is not accountable to any authorities, unlike, for example, teachers, military commanders, or ministers, priests, monks, and rabbis of mainstream religious denominations. This means there's some sort of checks and balances. If you're a teacher, you have a society of teachers who you're expected to respect. There's peer review. There's accountability in all kinds of ways. The Lord's recovery could give a hoot about accountability. They do their own thing. They don't care what anybody else thinks. And as a matter of fact, they probably think doing things differently from the way everybody does it is a good sign. Number 8, the group teaches or implies that its supposedly exalted ends justify whatever means it deems necessary. This may result in members participating in behaviors or activities that would have been considered reprehensible or unethical before joining the group. For example, lying to family or friends or collecting money for bogus charities. What this means is they have an end justifies the means mentality. The Lord's recovery engages in shady financial arrangements. They have a so-called tree of life view of morality where the tree of knowledge of good and evil is rejected. In their mind, that means we do not have to think about what is good and is evil. We just have to think about what is life. And in the end, that means they do whatever they want to, and they call it life. Number 9, the leadership induces feelings of shame, guilt in order to influence or control members. Often this is done through peer pressure and subtle forms of persuasion. Yes, the Lord's recovery uses peer pressure, uses the pressure of the group to control people. For example, testimonies. You give a testimony that everybody approves of, you get loud amens. If you say something that's a little questionable, you'll get groanings and people will look away from you. So there's a lot of pressure to gain the approval of the group. Subservience to the leaders of the group requires members to cut ties with family and friends and radically alter the personal goals and activities they had before joining the group. I said before that they expect you to skip holidays and vacations, to go to trainings. They don't like members to go to church with their families. They expect you to consider your church family as your real family and your physical family as something you've left behind. The group is preoccupied with bringing in new members, no doubt. Lord's Recovery wants numbers. They don't care about the people they bring in so much as they care about the fact that they're filling a seat. There's not real care in the Lord's Recovery for people as people. They are just being used to add numbers to the group. Number 12, the group is preoccupied with making money. Any group that sells burial plots to its members under the pretense that it's better to be buried around Lord's Recovery people than people who aren't in the Lord's Recovery is trying to make money from its members just about any way it can. Number 13, members are expected to devote inordinate amounts of time to the group and group-related activities. This goes without saying in the Lord's Recovery, and it is obviously true. Members are encouraged or required to live and or socialize only with other group members. The Lord's Recovery is very cloistered. They consider people in the Lord's Recovery as the ones they should have their best relationships with. People outside the Lord's Recovery are at best mistrusted. And finally, 15, the most loyal members feel there can be no life outside the context of the group. They believe there is no other way to be and often fear reprisals to themselves or others if they leave or even consider leaving the group. The Lord's Recovery considers that if you begin to think about leaving the Lord's Recovery, you've already been poisoned by the devil. Now, does that sound like a group that honors the freedom of conscience of its members? When it puts the idea in your head that if you even begin to think about leaving the Lord's Recovery, that you have already been poisoned by the devil, that is mind control. That is a fail-safe siege mentality which is designed to trigger you to recoil instinctively from any thought that you might leave the group. It's a control mechanism, obviously. Ms. Lalich did not make this list with the Lord's Recovery in mind, I'm pretty sure. She possibly has never even heard of the Lord's Recovery. So why does the Lord's Recovery so closely match up with the characteristics of a list that is supposed to signify the characteristics of a controlling, abusive religious group, aka a cult? Because that's what it is. It's not because God made his one move to look like one of these groups. It's because they are that, and they are not God's unique move. Here's the thing. There are thousands of cults, and there have been tens of thousands of them in history, and all of them think they are the one true move. And all of them expect their members not to leave. And all of them use these control mechanisms to keep their members there. And the Lord's Recovery is just one more. Is it Christian? Yes, it's Christian. But there have been a lot of Christian cults. The issue is not really whether their doctrines are heretical or not. The issue is what are the sociological aspects, particularly around the areas of control and mind control. And the Lord's Recovery is not good in those areas. This is not the way the church is supposed to operate. As I've said before, God accomplishes his purpose through voluntary relationships. The churches that Paul shepherded had voluntary relationships with him. They did not have to listen to Paul. They had the freedom to chart their own path, as each individual does. One person cannot just go around expecting people to consider him or her an authority, and no group of people can do it. There's no such thing as deputy authority as defined by the Lord's Recovery. It is a control mechanism. It's very unlikely that God would set up his one true move on earth to so much match what sociologists and experts in human behavior call a controlling, abusive group, aka a cult. It's just not likely. It's a strange revelation when you finally realize, wait a minute, I've been in a group that's been controlling me. I thought it was God's move. Well, of course you thought it was God's move. You wouldn't have stayed there if you didn't. Figuring out what the Lord's Recovery is like finding out how a magic trick works. It's kind of an empty feeling because you go, oh, it wasn't what it said it was. I wasted my time believing in that. And I think some people don't want to feel that. And so they hold on to hope that there's more to it. But that's all it is. That's all it is. It's just a cheap magic trick. I remember one thing one elder said in the meeting. He said, if any of us could leave this, we would. And I thought that was amazing that he admitted that because it's the way I felt. That's all that keeps people there. Very few people stay in the Lord's Recovery, I would think, because they think this is a really cool place and I want to spend the rest of my life here. People stay there because they think they have no choice. The people who do want to stay there, well, we probably need to keep an eye on them, but that's another story. So, here's another list by an expert that indicts the Lord's Recovery as a group you do not want to be a part of. There's no bias in this. I'm just reporting according to the description. I'm not here to label the Lord's Recovery as a cult. I don't particularly even like that word. But you can't deny that what sociologists call a cult is something that the Lord's Recovery very closely matches in behavior. It doesn't have so much to do with heresy as it does with its sociological behavior, particularly its authority structure and controlling aspect. So keep that in mind as you move on. Thanks again for listening. Take care.